Hey everyone, happy Blockheads Wednesday. This week is week 17 of group 2 of Blockheads 5. And our guest designer this week is Vanessa Christenson of V & Co., known for her gorgeous ombre fabrics. And her blog this week is called Life of the Party. And this is a super fun blog that's really cheerful and great for scrappy placement. It's great for the ombre fabrics that Vanessa does. So you get so many different gradients in your block when you make the quarter square triangles with those ombres. So this week we're going to be making the quarter square triangles and half square triangles. I'm going to revisit a tool that we used a few weeks ago for trimming up our quarter square triangles, and we're going to just knock this one out in no time. So grab your pattern and grab your fabrics and let's get sewing. Our fabric cutting is a breeze this week, so I'm making the 6-inch finished block. And so these are my cutting instructions. If you're making the 12-inch finished block, you're going to want to look at this column for your cutting instructions. So I've got my A and B squares to make my half square triangles right here. I got a little bit ahead of myself and wasn't really thinking, and I went ahead and cut them in half because that's how I like to make my half square triangles. So those were squares, and now I've gone ahead and cut them in half and they're ready to stitch together. Then I've got my squares, my C, D, E, and F squares for my quarter square triangles. And then I've got my G square for the center of my block. When I'm making half square triangles, anytime I can, I pair my half square triangle fabrics together when I'm cutting the squares out. I pair them right sides together. And then I cut my squares this way, and then I can cut them in half on the diagonal and take them right over to my sewing machine and start sewing those half square triangles. So I don't even have to spend the time to pair up my fabrics. So the first step of our block this week is to make those AB half square triangles. So since I've got these cut and paired and ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and make those. I will press towards I'm going to press towards the lighter fabric this time because this is my B fabric, and I want my fabrics for my quarter square triangle to be a little bit more prominent. So I'm actually going to press towards this lighter fabric this time, and I will trim these down to 2.5 inches for the 6-inch block. Okay, my pretty little half square triangles are trimmed and ready to set aside until we're ready to assemble the block. So now I can move on to the next step, which is to make my quarter square triangles. So I've got my 4 squares that I'm going to use to make my quarter square triangles. And I'm going to bring back out the June Taylor Perfect Half Square and Quarter Square Triangles ruler. I demoed this before. I think it was on Deb Strain's week when we did the Ohio Star, but I want to bring it back out again in case you missed it. It's such a great ruler, a great tool to use for making quarter square triangles. And I love the clever little marking guides and cutting guide. So let me get that set up and show you what that looks like. On one side of this ruler, there's these great grooves for marking your stitching lines on your squares. So it just makes it so easy to mark those lines. It's always a really time-consuming part of the process. So as you can see, now I've got this line going point to point on my squares. I've already got them paired up, right sides together, and I can just run my pen along the grooves here to mark my stitching lines. Okay, I've stitched my squares together on the marked lines, and now I can use the other side of the ruler to cut my squares in half. So now I'll line up these dotted lines with my stitching lines, and then I'll just use that groove to cut my square in half. So here you can see that I've got my stitching lines lined up with the dotted lines on the ruler, and now I can just use my rotary cutter and cut my squares in half, and I'll be ready to press out my half square triangles. Okay, I've got my half square triangles made, and I'm going to press them open. Now, it's important to know you don't trim them yet. So we're just going to press them open, and then we'll move to the next part of making our quarter square triangles. Okay, I've got my half square triangles pressed out. So now I'm going to pair them up. and I'm going to nest my seams. So I'll make sure that my seams are going in opposite directions so that they nest really nicely as I pair them up. And now I'm going to follow the same process to make half square triangles again. So I'll mark my lines and I'll stitch on those lines, cut them apart, and that's how I'm going to end up with my quarter square triangle. Okay, I'm all stitched on the lines, and now I'm ready to cut these in half and press open and trim my quarter square triangles. So when I press these, I'm going to press that seam open, and then we're going to trim them to 2.5 inches for the 6-inch block and 4.5 inches for the 12-inch block. This June Taylor ruler really is an all-in-one tool because now I can also use it to square up my quarter square triangles, and it makes it so easy because I've got these handy cutting grooves from 1.5 inches up to 6.5 inches, and then you can see it's got these guidelines to help me square up and perfectly align the seams of my quarter square triangle. So you can see that I've got these lines aligned with the seams of my quarter square triangle, these 45-degree lines, and that gives me the great visual that helps me know that I've got a nice centered quarter square triangle. So here are my cutting grooves. You can't see the numbers here, but I'm going to cut along this one. It's the second line out, and that's my 2.5-inch line. And then I can just rotate my unit and trim the other sides, and it'll be all squared up and ready to go. So here is my perfectly trimmed quarter square triangle, trimmed to 2.5 inches and ready to put into my block. Now, if you don't have the June Taylor perfect half square and quarter square triangles ruler, I definitely recommend you check it out. It just takes all of the guesswork out of trimming down your quarter square triangles. I love that you don't have to look for a point on your ruler or anything. You just, it takes all the guesswork and the math out of it. You just line up the lines on the seam and on the seams of your quarter square triangle and trim. But if you don't have one, here's how you're going to trim down your quarter square triangle. You want to consider that center point is going to be, the dead center of your trim to size. So for the 6-inch block, I want to trim my quarter square triangles to 2.5 inches. That means that this very center point needs to be at 1.25 inches on my ruler. So if I grab my ruler here and I'm looking for 1.25 inch, and from the right side of my ruler and 1.25 inch down. And so it's that point right there. And there's that 45-degree line. It's lined up on my seam. So that's a good visual. So I'm going to have a nice square, quarter square triangle when I'm done. So make sure that 1.25 inch point is right there at the very center, and that your 45-degree line on your ruler is aligned with this diagonal seam on your quarter square triangle. If you're making the 12-inch block, you're going to trim your quarter square triangles to 4.5 inches. So you want to look for 2.25 as your center point. Now that all of my units are trimmed, I'm ready to assemble my block. So as I join the units into rows, I'm going to press towards the half square triangles on the top and bottom row. I'm going to press towards the center square for the center row. And I'll probably bring out my easy press pen because I'm going to have a little bit of bulk here. So I'll bring that out to help me get a nice flat seam. And here is my finished Life of the Party block. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. This was such a fun block. I really love this one as an opportunity to just have fun and be really scrappy in your fabric placement. I didn't really think anything about my fabric placement on this one. I just picked, let's see, however many fabrics, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fabrics that I liked. I knew I wanted to go kind of lighter or sort of neutral colors on the inside and have something darker on my outside, but that was it. I just grabbed 6 fabrics and I cut the squares and randomly paired them up, and I love how it turned out. And that's a really fun way to piece a block, I have to say, without sweating out the fabric placement too much. Every once in a while, it's nice to just be a little bit random and scrappy, and you end up with a block that is the life of the party. So I love it. Here's my Americana version. Same thing. I just grabbed a bunch of pink fabrics, and the only thing that I really paid attention to is I decided that I was going to be intentional with my stripes when I ended up cutting this one for the half square triangles. So I did take a couple extra seconds to make sure that I had cut my squares in half in such a way that I could have my stripes going all the same direction. But otherwise, I didn't really even pay any attention to how I organized my my quarter square triangles, and I just love how these turned out. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for giving us this awesome block. What a fun block this was to put together. I hope that you guys have fun making your life of the party block as well. And I can't wait to see everyone's versions this week. So don't forget to join us in our official Facebook group. We'd love to have you. It's a great group with lots of inspiration. I think we have over 73,000 members now. So always great ideas in our Facebook group. So join us there. And then if you post your blocks on Instagram, don't forget to use the hashtag ModaBlockheads5. Thanks so much for watching this week's video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and have a great time sewing this week, and we'll see you next time.